Tech YouTuber Optimum recently released a video that's caused some debate over the future of gaming keyboards. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll link it below, but in summary, Razer has implemented new SnapTap software which grants players an advantage when strafing in certain FPS games like Counter-Strike. Some players, including professionals, are saying that this update is a form of exploiting and these new keyboards should be banned from competitive play. A competitor of Razer, Wooting, initially refused to implement a similar update in their keyboards as they believed that it was indeed unfair, but after significant demand from their customers, they have since come to the logical conclusion that they don't have a choice. As a professional ideas guy that's dedicated several videos wailing on exploits in video games, as well as having hit global elite in Wingman, it seems fitting that I give the definitive answer to this topic. Those in favour of banning these keyboards offer the following argument. The SnapTap update is essentially a macro, allowing players to input a movement key whilst releasing another movement key within the same input. Macros in the past have been bannable, but interestingly, CS tournament organisers currently allow these keyboards. There's an argument to be made that releasing an input is significantly different from making new inputs, so perhaps we could label this as an acceptable subcategory of macros, a wacro if you will. But stopping to think about it, what exactly is the issue of macros in the first place? Why are macros so often synonymous with cheating? The biggest example of a cheating macro that comes to mind is bunny hopping, a movement exploit that lets you jump faster. This observation reveals the crux of the issue. Macros make exploiting more effective. Bunny hopping, like counter-strafing, was an unintended exploit of the physics engine in these FPS games, which all have heritage tracing back to Quake. If you're unfamiliar with the history of this monumental title and how it ties directly to both Counter-Strike and metagames like Chivalry, I'd suggest reading Masters of Doom. The lead developer of Quake, John Carmack, who is a legitimate genius and made intense sacrifices to push first-person gaming into something we can recognise today, had this to say about the strafe jump exploit back in 1999. Strafe jumping is an exploitable bug. Just because people have practiced hard to allow themselves to take advantage of it does not justify its existence. When I tried fixing the code so that it just didn't work, I thought it changed the normal running movement in an unfortunate way. In the absence of power-ups or level features, wind tunnels, jump pads, etc., the game characters are supposed to be badasses with guns. Arnold and Sigourney Weaver don't get down a hallway by hopping like a bunny rabbit. This is personal preference, but when I play online, I enjoy it when people are running around dodging rather than hopping. It's crazy to me how this letter from over 2 decades ago has such strong parallels to the legitimised exploits of today, and how the concise logic of skilled exploits does not equal good game design is still not understood by the pro players that wield them. Macros aren't the problem, rather it's the exploits that the macros execute. If a player benefits from a string of inputs being made brainlessly by a script, then the issue is with the game, which should ideally only reward players reacting to new on-screen information. A game that is most effectively played with no input from the player is not a compelling game, just walk away from the PC. If these exploits are indeed beneficial to the gameplay, then why not make them easier to perform? If it turns out that everyone being able to utilise them is a problem, instead of just the pro players that spent time mastering them, then perhaps they should be removed from the game entirely. There are plenty of other intentional mechanics left to master. Lowering the skill floor required to execute these moves should not threaten anyone. An example of this being true is the feint to parry macro from Chivalry 1. Initially, players could only feint to parry by inputting right mouse twice, but players soon discovered they could bind both feint and parry onto the same bind, allowing people to parry out of an attack within a single input. Technically, this was an exploit, but nobody really had an issue with it besides one player called Nejo. This macro became so prevalent that it actually became the default control scheme in Mordhau, although I still recommend players to use the manual method, which offers more control and reduces the total number of binds. In hindsight, all this macro did was offer players an alternative control scheme which some players deemed preferable. So what are we to make of this plucky keyboard innovation? As someone that's well versed with the unhealthy attachment pro players have with their precious exploits, I'm able to see right through the fog of this debate. The SnapTap update is guilty of one crime, levelling the playing field between pros utilising exploits and new players. Whilst these exploits are accepted today, they were unintended by their original designers, because they are unintuitive. Typically when something is unintuitive, it's also strange to look at, or janky. That's why exploit is a pejorative. If a simple macro can expose this fact, then there's a serious issue with the game design at its core. Game devs should recognise this and do their best to either incorporate macros into official binds, helping new players, or just remove the exploits. And if you think Counter-Strike will become too easy when everyone can counter-strafe perfectly, maybe you should play a more skilled title like Quake.